Welcome to the Link Online. Hello once again. We're here live on Facebook and on one of these cameras. I guess it's this one right now. I can see the bright lights and the crowds are waving in the distance there. Yes, hello. Yes, hello. Yes, thank you. Well,
you haven't named the show.
Yes, I did at the beginning. I said, no. Welcome to the Link Online. Sue, where were you? Were you not here? You were busy waving to the crowd is what happened, I tell you. We have our regular crew here today. We have Lynn Desjardins with us. Hello, Lynn.
Hi, everyone.
See, there's the way.
La La Land today.
Levon Savons.
I'm here.
And filling in on keyboards and screens this week is Leo Jimeno.
Hi.
Hi, hi. And we have a special guest in studio, Elish Quinn.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
In the control room, once again, we have Chantal Saint-Sauveur. Hi, Chantal. There she is waving. We got to get a camera for her, I tell you. All right, coming up in this half hour, Levon, what do you have for us?
Well, I'll speak with an expert on child abuse or sexual child abuse about a recent arrest of a very prominent Canadian humanitarian worker in Nepal.
Lynn?
I'll tell you about a major land conservation project that is good not only for Canada, but for the rest of the world as well.
And I have news about tougher tobacco and vaping laws coming to Canada. And in just a moment, we'll... Excuse me. We'll start off with our special guest, Elish, to talk about a special subject on our website and on specifically the Eye on the Arctic website. That's coming up on this edition of The Link Online. All right, we're going to start out with you, Elish, and welcome to the show, by the way.
Why, thank you so much for having me.
It's the first time we've had you in our studio. Eye on the Arctic. Let's get, for those who don't know about this is a great site, very popular it's become in the short time that it's been available on the internet. What is it exactly? What do you do?
So it's a website that brings together media from all around the Arctic to share stories and share sort of ideas, problems, what's going on in the different Arctic regions and what people can learn from each other.
And this isn't just the Canadian Arctic, is it? This is what do you call it?
Absolutely.
Circumpolar.
Alaska, Norway, Russia. It's really a way to get all the Arctic regions talking together online on our site about the important issues of the region.
Okay. What about this special project you have this time around?
So the Arctic tourism in the age of Instagram, something that every Arctic region, whether it's Canada, Alaska, Finland, they're all looking for ways to really do economic development in a way that's not necessarily resource-based. Because that way, people, whatever your education level, there's small-scale entrepreneurship, everyone can get involved. And everyone is turning to Iceland. There's been a huge tourism boom now. It's one of the most popular destinations in the world, except there's one problem. When you have mass tourism on a fragile Arctic and subarctic environment, the damage is something that can't be repaired. So we went to Iceland, we traveled all around to hear about some of the good things, some of the bad things, and also some of the mistakes Iceland has made that other Arctic regions can learn from.
Yeah, I guess if you have thousands of people going to a spot that is not ready for them.
Millions now.
Millions?
Millions.
Wow. So you have... You need bathrooms, you have people throwing garbage around, you have people, trampling on the nature, which is difficult to repair.
All of the above, all of the above. A huge problem is that when people started going to the country, the government, for some reason, didn't get involved and direct people, organize people, look at what parts of the environment needed to be protected. Instead, it was pictures going viral on Instagram. And what happens that's even more severe for the Arctic and subarctic environment is when people see something that goes viral on Instagram, they want to go to the same place, same picture, same angle. So we're not even talking about something dispersed through the country. We're talking about very specific areas. And when you have hundreds of thousands of tourists doing the same thing, I mean, there's huge parts of the environment in Iceland have now been trampled away.
Oh, my. So they wanted to promote tourism, but they really weren't prepared for the consequences or how to handle it then.
Exactly. And that's something that a lot of Icelanders are saying. And even people in regions of Russia, Norway, Canada, is saying if we all want tourism in the Arctic as a way to have viable communities, but there has to be intense planning, scientists, environmentalists, urban planners, to think actually about what the consequences are going to be and to stop some of the problems that we're seeing in Iceland before they start.
So what specifically did you see?
I saw a lot of the same problems, the problems, as you mentioned, bathrooms. A lot of people, when I went to interview people, whether it was farms, even in the middle of nowhere, they would get out of their cars after picking me up from the side of the road, and they would be running around their properties collecting toilet paper. And for us, it can sound like something silly, but imagine you're doing that every single day. In the same place, in the same way. And again, one thing that's quite remarkable is even though many of the Icelanders are frustrated with what they're saying we sort of can't blame the tourists because they're coming here. You can't bring 2 million people a year into a country, not provide bathrooms for them, and expect things to not be in this way that they are now.
So how are all these people getting there? Is it ships and trains, ships and planes, I mean?
It's planes. That's one of the things that Iceland, you can say it's an advantage or a disadvantage, is that it's an Arctic region that's easy to get to. There's been a number of budget flights that it's sort of, Iceland has marketed itself as a hub between North America and Europe. So it's one of these Arctic regions that's technically easy to get to, and we sort of see what happens when that's the case.
So what are people going to see and learn from this report that you've done?
Well, I think we're going to hear from a lot of Icelanders, whether it's the police, whether it's regular citizens, about how it's affecting their everyday lives. But we're also going to hear about some of the advantages. And one of the positive aspects in Iceland is that a lot of the dying communities, farming communities, fishing communities, tourism is actually giving them a second life. So we look at the positives and the negatives and sort of see where we go from here, and most importantly, what other countries can learn from Iceland's mistakes.
And I guess this wouldn't apply just to the North or Arctic-like communities, but anywhere pretty much where there's a sense of environment where they're trying to promote tourism and they're not really prepared for it, whether it be in the South or the North or anywhere.
That's a really good point, because we hear more and more in places like Barcelona or, other places in the world, Venice, where tourism has become so omnipresent that it's driven locals out of their own homes and cities. The thing that's special about the Arctic is the environment is so fragile. So it adds a different dimension. And in a place like Iceland, very little topsoil, where it takes 100 to 200 years for this very special moss to grow. Once that's trampled away, it's not something that you can replant or bring back. So I think the Arctic, the specificity is that just the environment is so fragile.
So a very, very interesting report about what people should think about the consequences when they're doing any action, I guess, in some way.
Absolutely. And as we know in Canada, with cruise ships are now making their way more and more through the Northwest Passage. A lot of the Inuit villages on the Northwest Passage are actually welcoming tourists in. But a lot of these questions that people are saying, how many cruise ships should we have? How many people should we be letting off the boats during the summer season to come to the villages? And are any of these things that we're seeing in Iceland, should we start paying attention to that now and sort of planning ahead before it becomes a problem?
I guess also it would have an effect on the culture. If you're talking like Inuit communities, because they'll start doing things for the tourists instead of doing things for themselves, kind of thing.
Absolutely. But one thing, and we have to say, it's very different in Iceland. They don't have an indigenous population the way they do in other Arctic countries. But one thing that's really interesting, and one of the positives, is that the rural communities and these dying villages, fishing villages, dying farming communities, that once people started saying that tourists wanted to go to these places, people had a sense of pride about their communities. Young people are coming back, and parts of Iceland that were dying are being repopulated. So one of the things that people say is that with tourism, for example, in the Sami regions of Scandinavia or the Inuit regions of the Arctic, when you see that the world is ready to come to see your culture and your place, in some ways it can reinforce it. So it can go both ways, but there are positives of tourism as well.
So how do people find this site, Elise?
Well, they go to Eye on the Arctic, Arctic Tourism, and they have the complete dossier, the complete file there, and it's also available in French for our French readers and listeners.
Okay, Elise Quinn, thank you so much for this.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
All right, we have more to come on the program here on the Link Online. Well, the boreal forest, talking about sensitive environmental areas, the boreal forest certainly is extremely important in the world. It encircles the world's northern latitudes. Large swaths of it are in Canada, and last week, a large area in the province of Alberta was set aside to be protected. And then you had the story on this.
Mark, this is of worldwide importance, I guess in part because the boreal forest is the world's largest land-based carbon sink. That's to say that it's where greenhouse gases of carbon and methane are stored in the ground. And the boreal forest is sometimes called the lungs of the earth because it takes in carbon dioxide and sends out oxygen. It's also one of the largest ecosystems that still has plenty of room for animals. The area that will be protected in Western Canada will measure 3,300 square kilometers, and that's more than twice the size of Belgium. So for more on this, I spoke with Dan Krause. He's a senior biologist with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which was a key player in this project. Mr. Krause, tell me about this land that will be conserved.
This is Canada's boreal forest. So the boreal forest is the forest that stretches around the northern temperate regions. About a third of all of the boreal forest in the world is in Canada. And boreal forest includes some of the last large intact forest landscapes left on the planet. It even surprises many Canadians that if you ask them where's the largest, most intact forest in the world, many Canadians will think that it's in the Amazon or in Africa, but it's actually here in Canada, in this northern boreal forest. This is not just a forest, it also has huge areas of wetlands and a huge number of freshwater lakes as well. From a wildlife perspective, what makes the boreal so important is that it's one of the last places in the world where you find animals that have room to migrate, to roam around. So we have species on this property that we're protecting, like the woodland caribou and the wood bison. The wood bison is the largest land animal that lives in North America. And the boreal forest is also critical for songbirds. It's sometimes referred to as North America's bird nursery. Right now, in the spring, there are billions of birds that are migrating from where they wintered in the United States, Mexico, Central America, and they're going up to the boreal forest to raise the next generation of songbirds. So protecting the boreal forest is not just important for Canada, it's important for conservation from a global perspective. And through this project, by protecting over 3,000 square kilometers, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the Tall Cree tribal government, and the government of Alberta are really making a huge contribution to protecting life on Earth. So the land that's going to be protected, it's 3,300 square kilometers in northern Alberta, and it's going to be designated as a provincial park called the Birch River Wildland Park. How it got to be a provincial park is through a very unique collaborative process. The Nature Conservancy of Canada worked with the local Indigenous government, the Tall Cree tribal government, and the government of Alberta to secure this land. And the way that we did that was by purchasing the timber rights from the Tall Cree government, extinguishing those timber rights so it can never be logged, and that clears the way for the government of Alberta to designate this as a protected area. And funding to purchase and extinguish those forestry rights came from the government of Canada and also from Syncrude Canada.
For the oil company Syncrude Canada, the donation can be counted as compensation for other areas that it has disturbed through its oil sand extraction operations. Now, this area is pretty remote, but parts of it already have trails and some campsites, although they're unserviced. There are also fishing and hunting allowed in some of the parts of this area that we're talking about. Indigenous people will be involved in the management of the new parks that are going to be created, and I've posted some wonderful pictures of the area and the wildlife found there and some links, so you may want to go and have a look on our website and see them for yourself.
Well, there's some of them there that you can see there. I mean, it just looks wonderful. Yep. This is like in the wood buffalo and the new areas. It's in the extreme north of Alberta. I believe some of the park actually goes into the Northwest Territories.
Yes.
But it must be amazing to go up there, though.
I'd love to go up there and see it.
If I remember correctly, a few months ago, we were talking about, isn't it a UNESCO World Heritage Site or one of the sites that Canada has presented to be part of the World Heritage sites. I remember briefly something like that, probably reading something. But it's definitely an area I'd love to see. It's
far from here, though. Yeah. People forget how big Canada is, where it's like 8,000 kilometers across. So from Montreal, who knows how far it is. It's over 3 provinces away to the west.
And not only do you have to go across the country to get there, then you have to go up north in Alberta, which is itself a huge province, I should say.
Yeah.
Boy.
But lots of wonderful stuff to see for when we retire, Mark, and win the lottery.
Win the lottery.
Yeah.
All right. Coming up, we're going to be talking about new laws for tobacco in this country. Well, Canada has passed some new amendments to its Tobacco Act, and these further toughen restrictions on the sale of tobacco products. And one of the measures, for example, is expected to result in what is called plain packaging, that is removing all company logos and bright colors on the boxes to be replaced by warning photos and a small plain band at the bottom with the company name, and that's just about it. E-cigarettes, also known as vaping, will also come under new rules, which include a ban on sales to minors and a ban on certain flavors or aromas, I guess, known as confectionery, which are targeted at young people. Now, I spoke to Rob Cunningham of the Canadian Cancer Society about the new amendments, which are expected to come into effect in a few months. And in this excerpt, I asked him for details on the new law.
It deals with plain packaging for tobacco products. It deals with e-cigarettes, and both are very important. For us, the package is the most important type of tobacco advertising that remains in Canada, and we want to get rid of it. We want to protect kids from that type of promotion. Canada will follow 8 other countries that already have this measure.
But now Canada has had some pretty horrific pictures on tobacco boxes. That doesn't seem to have stopped anybody in spite of these, again, horrific pictures of what cancer can do to you.
Canada was the first country in the world to have picture health warnings on cigarette packages in 2001. Heart disease, cancer, disease mouth, as you mentioned. They work. They've helped to reduce smoking. However, we need to keep making progress. And we don't want to have the tobacco companies using packages that have mountain scenes or pink packages and super slims formats targeting women. And plain packaging will get rid of that. Australia was the first country to require plain packaging in 2012, and they've since been joined by the United Kingdom, France, Ireland, Norway, New Zealand, and others. And it's a real part of an international momentum.
Well, Mr. Cunningham, what about the e-cigarettes and the popularity of their rise? And we don't really know the effects of vaping, do we?
Well, although we don't know the long-term effects, we do know that e-cigarettes are less harmful than conventional cigarettes. And Health Canada, through this legislation, is going to legalize e-cigarettes, although they're widely available. The current situation is not being enforced. But it's going to regulate e-cigarettes.
Well, Mr. Cunningham, isn't it a bit ironic, even perhaps disingenuous, of the government to be going after tobacco and reduce smoking on the one hand, and yet legalizing smoking marijuana and products?
I think alcohol and cannabis are here to stay. For tobacco, it's different because in the case of tobacco, we want to have a tobacco-free society. Health Canada has a new objective to get to under 5% by 2035. And the minister is going to release details of a new federal tobacco control strategy as part of increased funding in the last federal budget. We've made progress, but we have a lot more to do.
Do we know how harmful smoking marijuana is in terms of the health aspects?
Most people smoke cannabis infrequently. In terms of cancer, the risk is very different, whereas cigarette smokers smoke many cigarettes per day. So there is a difference. If someone wants to smoke as much in terms of cannabis cigarettes as they do for normal cigarettes, you probably have similar risks. But in general, that's not what happens.
So in summary, Mr. Cunningham, what do you think of the government's proposals then? Do they go far enough, in your opinion?
Well, I think this is a bill we're supporting. There's so much more that we can do to get to that objective of under 5% by 2035.
And that was Rob Cunningham of the Canadian Cancer Society, who said the goal is to reduce the percentage of smokers in Canada to under 5% of the population. And the full interview is in our highlights section. Now we're going to take a look at some of your comments that you've posted to stories on our website. And as always, public commenting is open on all RCI stories. You just have to scroll down to the very bottom of each story to submit your thoughts about the story. And you can also read those of others who have already posted there. And we have just a few comments this week due to time factors. And starting us off is a story about giving needles to drug addicts in Canadian prisons. And Rita, 65, said,
I can't believe it. Please tell me we're not giving free needles for illicit drug use in prison and diabetics have to pay for theirs.
All right. We're not exactly sure whether she meant diabetics in prison have to pay for theirs or whether it's in the general population. But yes, the story is that the Canadian government will be giving free needles. It's a needle exchange program, I guess, for illicit drug use in prison. This has caused a lot of controversy. 2 prisons. Yeah, 2 prisons. A pilot project, one in New Brunswick and one in Ontario, but with plans to expand the program next year to more prisons. And this is the guards are questioning this to say, wait a minute, on the one hand, we're supposed to fight drug use in prison, and now you're giving free needles for drug addicts. So they're in a bit of a quandary about how that's going to work.
The reason they want to do that is because, of course, the rate of HIV infection and hepatitis C infection is
manifestly
higher than the general population.
And that's because people are sharing the needles that have been smuggled in. All right, so that's that story. On a story called Canada Deeply Concerned by Gaza Violence, Mohammed Dajulamara wrote this.
Canada should not be concerned when armed bands bring their children to a riot and expect that everyone will be safe. They should stop this barbaric practice of exposing their kids to such violence.
Now, on the same story, Samia Haj wrote,
Canada cannot just be, quote, deeply concerned. What is happening in Palestine is simply a genocide, and Canada has to act, not only whisper some banalities such as this statement.
Now, on a story called Inuit Want Exemption from Registry of Guns Used for Hunting, and I should point out that although Canada scrapped its long gun registry as being expensive and ineffective at stopping crime, Quebec has begun to start its own registry of long guns. James Herr wrote this.
As an Ontario resident who is in disagreement with Ontario's issuance of big game tags, I have considered hunting moose in Quebec with an outfitter. If I have to register a shoulder arm in Quebec to do so, I'll go somewhere else.
All right, and that is going to end our comments. Oh, wait, there's one more, actually, I should say. This was a post to a story called The End of the ATM Could Start in Quebec, and that story relates to the financial institution, the Caisse Populaire, a very popular bank-like co-op in Quebec, and that is reducing the number of its automatic banking machines, saying that more people are using mobile phones to bank electronically. Giorgio Pop wrote this.
I will definitely be switching to another bank if Desjardins does this. Plus, I am in the group of people that they are aiming to please with their advance in smartphone usage. I still need and use paper money and have no plans in changing this in future. There are so many problems with what they suggest that I don't know where to start.
All right, so that will end our comments for this week. Of course, you can go to any story on the RCI page and post your thoughts there. More to come. The recent arrest of a prominent Canadian aid worker on suspicion of child sex abuse in Nepal is sending shockwaves through the humanitarian community. And Levon, you looked into this story.
Yeah, Mark, on Monday, officials in Nepal announced that they have arrested and charged Peter Dalglish with child sexual abuse. Mr. Dalglish is a prominent humanitarian. He helped found the charity Street Kids International. He has worked for decades for a number of humanitarian agencies, including the UN Habitat in Afghanistan and the UN Mission for Ebola Emergency Response in Liberia. He has been awarded the Order of Canada for his work with children. But in late April, He was arrested by Nepalese police following a months-long investigation. He's accused of raping at least 2 boys. We have to point out that at this point, these are only allegations that have not been proven in court, and Mr. Dalglish denies all the charges against him. However, this latest scandal comes less than 3 months after another sex abuse scandal hit the international charity Oxfam. And Laurie Handerhan says it's part of a deeply rooted problem in the international NGO community. She's a veteran humanitarian worker and the author of Epidemic, America's Trade in Child Rape. And she says international humanitarian NGOs present a perfect cover for a pedophile.
So just in general, not speaking specifically about Peter Dalglish's case, in general, a child sex abuser has to establish a supply line of children to abuse. So what I think most people misunderstand is they think that just this child was abused. You know, this priest happened to abuse this one child. And what is actually the situation is that predators will abuse many, many children over the course of their lifetime, just as predators who go after adults will rape and sexually abuse many adults. So they purposely and very strategically and tactically set up a secure supply line to vulnerable children. So when you sit down and do the research, as I've done, on child sexual predators, you will find that men, because it's largely men who do this, there are increasing numbers of women that we're seeing being arrested for child sex abuse, but it's overwhelmingly white men in positions of power in America and North America. They will cultivate positions of power where they have access to vulnerable children. So when you look at doctors who have been arrested and convicted for child pornography, it's overwhelmingly pediatricians, of course, who have access to children. And then even more concerning is pediatric oncologists. Heads of pediatric oncologists have been convicted for child pornography at very elite pediatric oncology units in America. And it makes sense if you're a pedophile, because a child who's terminally ill, who's going to be dead quite soon, can't be a witness against you. So that's an ideal child for a pedophile to molest. The same in the humanitarian world. When there is an earthquake in Nepal or an earthquake in Haiti or a tsunami in Asia, a humanitarian disaster, or a man-made conflict like South Sudan, you have a huge population of very vulnerable children who are basically dispensable. So a man who gets a job with Save the Children or the Red Cross or Oxfam or a UN agency and goes to work in a humanitarian response can very easily rape and molest and abuse many, many children who would have no way to report this abuse, have nobody protecting them, and nobody will ever know that they've done this. So a humanitarian is an ideal position for a pedophile because it's access to large numbers of vulnerable children over the course of their lifetime.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Laurie Handerhan. She's a veteran humanitarian worker and the author of Epidemic, America's Trade in Child Rape. Handerhan is calling on the international humanitarian NGOs to implement dramatic changes to root out all forms of abuse, including protecting whistleblowers. And she herself had a very, personal experience with that. She was basically, her contract with UNHCR in Chad in 2004 was not extended after she reported a case of sex for aid.
Exchange sex for help. Yeah.
In one of the camps, and she says that person who kind of fired her is now a high-ranking UN official. So, and she says it's
rampant.
It's rampant, and in a way, she says that there are easy ways of going around this, because you could install special monitoring software. Because she says these pedophiles, what they do, they're hooked to the internet. They need to trade these photos, and the moment they use that, you can nail them. And but
there has to be a will.
There has to be a will. And she says so far not many NGOs have shown political will to do that.
Oh my, it's a bit of a shocking
Horrifying.
Horrifying story. Well, let's turn to something a little bit lighter as we come to the end of the program. This is Asian Heritage Month in Canada, and Leo, we have a special spot on our website. You want to just tell us a bit about that?
Yes, you're trying to give me the way to speak English.
That's right. You know,
it's going to be complicated.
I should point out that Leo is a webmaster, and he works with this today, for example. He's been in the studio pretty much all day long.
Spanish, French, and now English. I'm going to show you how to go to the site for Asian Heritage Month. You have to go here in the right thing in the website. You click there, and you can go to the site who have all the material that you are doing.
Okay, lots of photos
about,
and stories and stuff.
Yeah. About the Asian Heritage Month.
Well, you've done an excellent job, Leo.
Thank you,
English,
Leo.
I'm so sorry.
That's all the time we have for today. So for Lynn and Levon and myself and Chantal in the control room and Leo, thank you so much for joining us. Take care until next week. Bye-bye.